The Louise Branscomb Barrier Breaker Award is presented annually to a North Alabama United Methodist who has shown courage and willingness to take risks to stand up for the rights of women, ethnic minority persons, and other marginalized persons. This year, we received a record number of nominations from across our conference, which is good news. We would like to recognize all those who were nominated this year for the work that they're doing in their communities and churches. All of these people are breaking barriers to make their congregations and communities places where God's love and grace are shared with all. I would like to invite those who are nominated to stand if they're with us as I read their names, and we can recognize them all after all their names have been read. The Reverend Stephanie Arnold, Maria Veal Eason, Teresa Harper, Billy Augusta Phillips, and Jenny Strickland. Let's show them our appreciation for their ministry. This year's winner of the Louise Branscomb Barrier Breaker Award is Allison Dearing. Allison is a member at Birmingham First. One of her pastors, Keith Thompson, wrote about her. Allison Dearing left a lucrative legal career to travel the uncertain road of creating something that was desperately needed but didn't exist in her community and would confront an issue that society doesn't like to talk about. Allison saw a need for more dignified and coordinated care for victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse, and began to walk the political minefield of uniting the Birmingham Police Department, the District Attorney's Office, Social Services, the YWCA, and the Crisis Center, all under one roof. This missional effort enabled victims of domestic violence to receive a coordinated effort in response to their abusive situation. Prior to Allison's creation of One Place, victims of domestic violence were forced to retell their story multiple times in multiple locations to multiple people. Even when the victims did everything they were supposed to do, the information could get lost between the disconnected departments. The previous setup often left already vulnerable women feeling lost, uncared for, and further devalued. Through Allison's creation of One Place, these women experienced help, hope, and new life. But Allison was also nominated by members of her church who lifted her up as someone who on a personal level offered care and compassion to others. She was instrumental in helping her church family respond to a tragic and highly public incidents of domestic violence within their own congregation. Allison Dearing is someone who has shown courage and willingness to stand up for others, particularly for those who are victims of domestic abuse. Her work is changing the lives of women and their families across Birmingham. One of the things that Allison is doing is training pastors to help recognize the signs of abuse and to appropriately respond. And if you're a pastor in North Alabama, you'll be invited to attend one of those trainings in your district. It is with great joy that the COSROW team presents the Louise Branscomb Award to Allison Dearing.
Thank you. Last year was the very first annual conference that I have ever attended, and I have to tell you, in a million years, it never would have occurred to me that I would be here on this stage, on this side of the microphone, looking out at all of you. In fact, I never could have imagined most of what has transpired over these last months since we were here together. It's a privilege to have this opportunity to share with you briefly about our work, and I want to express my deep appreciation to COSROW. While I did not have the chance to know Dr. Branscomb, I do have the pleasure of knowing Reverend R.G. Wilson Lyons, who was the recipient of this award last year, and I have to say I am truly humbled to be included in a category on a list anywhere near RG's name. What a gift he is to the North Alabama Conference and to our Birmingham First congregation. In full disclosure, the United Methodist Church is a fairly new home for me. I grew up Baptist. My father is a retired Baptist pastor, and my mother has held leadership across the Baptist Convention. For many of our summers growing up, our vacations were connected to wherever the Southern Baptist Convention was meeting that year. And those are some very special memories for me, and so it feels very comfortable to be here now joining you at annual conference this summer. When my husband Jason and I and our 2 sons found our way to First Methodist in Birmingham about 5 years ago, we were searching for something that we couldn't yet articulate. But we found a new home, a new way to experience community and diversity and acceptance and faith. We built new relationships and worshiped in ways that looked different from what we had known, and we began sharing experiences together within that community that have built deep bonds of friendship and connection. Last year, on May the 12th, we experienced something as a church family that was tragic and has forever changed our congregation and as us as individual people. If you were here yesterday, you heard Reverend Stephanie Arnold share about how we were impacted in a very profound way when a mother in our church was shot and killed by her ex-boyfriend, and 4 of her children were shot and injured in a heinous act of domestic violence. Thus begins the story of how life and church and work and faith all became interwoven. You see, I've made a career out of working to prevent and respond to domestic violence, and yet nothing could have prepared me for the call I received from one of our pastors that morning, or for the long walk down the hallway at Children's Hospital to meet our pastor, Keith Thompson. For the previous 5 years, I had been part of a small community planning committee working to develop a family justice center in Birmingham, basically a one-stop shop where victims and survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence can receive services from law enforcement, prosecution, counseling, and advocacy all under one roof. We knew this was a best practice model finding success in communities across the country, and we knew we needed it in Birmingham, but we weren't quite there yet with our collaboration. We'd come so far as to find a building where we could co-locate all of our resources. Our mayor and DA and police chief were on board, and we were in the midst of planning a press conference to introduce this new resource center to the larger community. The call that came on May 12th, immediately after the call from our pastor, was from our district attorney. And he said, "Allison, I don't know if you've heard yet, but there's been a terrible shooting, and a mother has been killed, and 4 of her children were also shot. And the mayor and the police chief are calling on us to get this family justice center up and running." I just remember being able to say to him, "I know this family. These children have been in my home." And then I remember him saying to me, "We have to do this so that her life was not lost in vain." By 2 o'clock that afternoon, we were standing at City Hall with cameras and microphones in our faces, the DA on one side, the mayor on the other, promising to make One Place Family Justice Center a reality in our community so that no more lives were lost to domestic violence. Unfortunately, 20 lives were lost to domestic violence in Jefferson County alone last year. They were women, men, mothers, sisters, and brothers, and children, but primarily women. Our friend's name was Coral. And while it's tempting to think about domestic violence as an anger issue or a mental health issue or because of an addiction, in fact, domestic violence is ultimately about a quest for power and for control. It encompasses a variety of tactics that over time keep a person trapped in a relationship, afraid to try and escape. Many victims who are seeking assistance are experiencing multiple tactics to frighten, isolate, degrade, and subordinate them, along with physical assaults and threats. Sometimes those tactics rise to the level of a crime, and sometimes on their own they don't. But they keep the victim in fear and under the abusive partner's control. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will be the victim of domestic violence in their lifetime. And from where I sit, and I hope where you sit, Those numbers are unacceptable and overwhelming and represent so much work for us to do. But what I want to say to you today is that even in the midst of a society where violence seems commonplace, and in the midst of this tragedy that shook us to our core, we are finding hope. Less than a month after Coral's death, many from our congregation came together after services one Sunday to learn more about domestic violence, to try to understand the factors and the circumstances that, without appropriate intervention, can end in tragedy. As a church body, we pledged to say no more to domestic violence and committed to finding ways to doing that across our community. The United Methodist Children's Home came and did a training for our church members who might be interested in becoming foster parents, and more than 50 people showed up. Our own clergy and staff began discussions about how to involve other clergy in prevention and awareness efforts, recognizing that domestic violence is present in many congregations across our conference. Clergy across our city were encouraged to identify one Sunday when they might consider preaching about and against domestic violence. And in order to be prepared for the disclosures that would come after a sermon about domestic violence, clergy were asked to participate in training sessions where we identified the risk factors and discussed appropriate interventions and resources. One session led to 2 additional sessions, then an invitation from the bishop to come to the conference office to lead a training for the cabinet and staff. Yesterday morning, we led that training here at annual conference at the invitation of our bishop and because of her leadership. I think it's important for you to know that after each of those clergy trainings, people came forward, mostly privately, to share their own experiences of emotional abuse and physical abuse and stalking. Domestic violence occurs across every race and class. It happens to lawyers, it happens to executives, and yes, even to clergy and to church staff. From the preaching about domestic violence and services at our church last month, more members from within our own congregation came forward, courageously seeking help and resources and safety. This is not an us and them kind of problem. This impacts us. In May of this year, just a few weeks ago, we officially opened the doors to One Place Family Justice Center. And on May the 14th, members of our First Church congregation came to One Place after worship to plant flowers, to tour the facility, and to collectively offer a blessing for the work that is being done there and for the people who are finding strength for their journey to safety and healing. And I have a slide I want to show you of our building. For many months, we operated from this drawing by an architect we met who helped us design our space. Everywhere we went, we carried this picture so that we could share our vision for what could be. And then on Sunday in May, a few weeks ago, if I can have the next slide, this is the reality of a vision coming to life. Remembering the pain that was being transformed and a recognition of the ways that our lives are woven together through events and connections and our faith in ways that we can never imagine. I want to thank you again for this opportunity to share with you about the places where we see hope in the midst of tragedy and healing in the midst of pain and life springing forth in places where we felt like death would swallow us up. This is the message of the gospel. As I close, I invite you to hear this reflection offered by Reverend Arnold as our church gathered at One Place last month. She said, "The mystery of our faith is that life does find a way. Sometimes it springs from life to life, and sometimes it springs from death to life, but the Creator is always creating." This building was originally erected in 1970 to house women who needed respite for the night. They were fed, offered a place to sleep, and found care within its walls. Then it sat dormant for over a year and went through its own season of winter and desolation. Today we celebrate that it is once again bearing witness to the mystery of life finding a way. Within its walls now will be advocates, counselors, lawyers, police, and gentle, loving hands to welcome in the brave souls who ask for support. This is a place of resurrection. This is a place that forever bears the good news that abundant life is possible and what God hopes for all of the world. Thank you.